Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, kicking off their first conference game as a member of the Big Ten, going on the road to play UCLA. And for the Oregon fans, we kind of saw against Oregon State what we expected to see from this Oregon team kind of to start the 2024 season. And if they can replicate that performance, and I think more importantly, build off that performance heading into conference play, like make no mistake about it, this team is as dangerous as it gets in the Big Ten. Now you look at UCLA, we kind of knew Deshaun Foster had his work cut out for him. Obviously, Chip Kelly leaving at just a not ideal time, but I think more importantly, a lot of players leaving through the transfer portal as well. I think this UCLA team is kind of just trying to find their identity on both sides of the football. I thought it was an impressive first half for UCLA against LSU on the road. Now, I have significant question marks about the offensive line. We're going to get into that. Want to get into, a few key matchups, key players that I'll be looking at in this football game, 11 Eastern time, late night for the boys on the East Coast, but I'm fired up for this one. Before we get into it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and the amount of support y'all have shown for the game previews, the game predictions. They're a blast for the boys to do. Can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And let's start with this Oregon offense that, seemingly kind of came together against Oregon State. And I think a couple of big reasons, but I think most importantly, the offensive line. If there was one big takeaway that Oregon fans, I think, should be having coming out of that Oregon State game, was the offensive line. I think you found your best five, especially with Matthew Bedford still dealing with the injuries. Now, I think that's a question mark that I'm excited to see. Like, is Matthew Bedford back healthy? Is he going to start? I look at that Oregon offensive line with Poncho back at center in the shot at guard and say that was by far the best version of the offensive line that we've seen throughout the first three games for Oregon. And because the offensive line came together, like the offense started to cook, right? The running game was much more, not only more dynamic, but it was a little bit more efficient as well. And I think that was such a struggle for Oregon in the first two games where, look, if you pop a few big runs, I love it. Like, you want to be explosive on offense, but it's really important to keep this Oregon team kind of on schedule. And the amount of negative plays that Oregon took, whether it was penalties, whether it was sacks, whether it was tackles for loss, it kind of killed a lot of Oregon drives in the first two games. You didn't see those penalties. You didn't see those negative plays. This Oregon team stayed on schedule throughout the game against Oregon State. And again, as a result, the Oregon offense started to cook. You look at Dylan Gabriel. Dylan Gabriel, for the national media coming down on Oregon as hard as they've had the first couple of weeks of the season. Like, you look at Dylan Gabriel's numbers, 84% completion percentage, 6 touchdowns to 0 interceptions, over 900 yards through 3 games. Like, Dylan Gabriel's been what we expected him to be for this Oregon offense. And I think what's so exciting for the Oregon fans is I think he's still leaving some throws on the table. And we know Dylan Gabriel can make those throws. We just want to see him make them a little bit more consistently. And as him and Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart and Trayshawn Holden continue to build that chemistry with each other, I think it only gets better. The run game was there. Like, again, why were we so high on Oregon heading into 2024? Multidimensional offense. That's what you saw against Oregon State. You got 4 guys in the pass catcher room that have gone for over 100 yards throughout the first 3 games. So there's just so many different matchups that, Will Stein and Dylan Gabriel can go to within this Oregon offense. But I think the key stat that I want to look at real quick, Dylan Gabriel is 56% completion percentage, 20 plus yards down the field. That's really impressive. And you want to see this Oregon offense continue to push the ball vertically down the field because it's going to open stuff up for guys like Terrence Ferguson and Tez Johnson underneath. I think that was one of the struggles that we saw early in the season, was it didn't really seem like they were letting Dylan Gabriel off the leash. I think that certainly has something to do with the offensive line not holding up in pass protection. Dylan Gabriel can push it down the field. You want to use him like that. Like, he's a Heisman caliber quarterback for a reason. Let the leash off him and let him run this offense. Looking at UCLA's defense, it's quite good against the run. I think that's one of the battles that I'm looking at here is, can Oregon establish the run against what a solid front seven that UCLA has, only given up 2.7 yards or 3.2 yards per carry. That's 27th in the country. Now, the secondary for UCLA, that's where I think it struggles a little bit. Obviously, gave up a lot to LSU, gave up a lot to Indiana as well. I think losing Danton, I think losing a few key players in that UCLA secondary, probably headlined by Kamari Ramsey, you're still seeing that UCLA secondary trying to gel, for lack of better terms. They're giving up a 68% completion percentage to opposing quarterbacks. And look, you got the quarterback that's number one in the country coming in terms of completion percentage. That's a matchup that I think Oregon will certainly be attacking in this football game. Now, flipping the sides, the big problem with UCLA, like, look, I think Ethan Garbers is a solid quarterback, but I don't think he's a quarterback that can do it all himself. And I think throughout the first couple games of the season, he's kind of had to do that, right? UCLA not running the football well at all, like 2.7 yards per carry on the ground. That's 121st in the country. They don't run it that much. And the problem is when you want to go to the, excuse me, when you want to go to the air with Ethan Garbers, I think you have some guys, J. Michael Sturdivant, Rico Flores. I think Ethan Garbers can be a solid quarterback, but the pass protection has been a disaster for UCLA, specifically on the inside of the offensive line. And what's most frustrating about the pass protection is it's really just not picking up stunts the right way. I mean, LSU was just running kind of some basic games and stunts up front, not really bringing a ton of pressure, and UCLA really struggled to pick some of that up. And so if you're an Oregon fan heading into this football game, you're looking for, particularly on the inside of the defensive line, you want to see your game wreckers be game wreckers. And I think one of the biggest storylines for Oregon coming out of the first couple of games, like you hit on Derek Harmon. Like Derek Harmon is looking like one of the best interior defensive linemen that we see not only in the Big Ten, but in the country. This was a massive talking point for us coming into 2024 where, hey, can we get some interior defensive linemen that can really just blow up football games on the defensive side of the football? You had solid defensive linemen last year, but they weren't game wreckers. Like Derek Harmon's been a game wrecker, and he's going up against the UCLA offensive line that has struggled significantly on the inside. So you look at Derek Harmon, you look at potentially having Jordan Burch rotate maybe as a three tech a little bit at times, Jamari Caldwell. That's kind of the matchup that if you're an Oregon fan, you're trying to get after, because you look at this Oregon secondary, it's been elite. I mean, 4.3 yards per pass attempt, that's number 5 in the country. The thing that Oregon's going to have to deal with here is UCLA likes to work their running backs and tight ends in the pass game. So I don't see UCLA testing guys like Jabbar Muhammad all that much on the boundary. But you look at 2 of the 3 leading target pass catchers, I should say. I don't know if that came out the right way for UCLA. Yeah, it's TJ Harden in the tight end. Like that's how UCLA wants to run this passing attack, is through the tight ends and running backs. If you're Oregon, like there's a lot of pressure on your linebackers to make sure they're holding up in coverage. I think Bryce Betcher's been really good. Quite frankly, I think with Jeffrey Bossa kind of dealing with kind of just not being right from a health standpoint, he's been on the field, but you can tell he's kind of on a snap count and he's not 100% healthy. He might be coming out of the bye week. Bryce Betcher has been a monster. Devin Jackson continues to progress in terms of knowing what he's doing on the football field. He's going to be tested because, again, UCLA wants to get the football to their tight ends and running backs. And primarily, I think these Oregon linebackers are going to have to show up in coverage. Getting into the pick here, I think it's really hard to bet on UCLA right now, even at home. And I think it'll be a fun environment. It's obviously a late kick. I'm going to take Oregon in the points for a couple of reasons. One, this UCLA secondary has struggled immensely. I think they're going up against an Oregon passing attack that is really good, especially as the pass protection gets better for Oregon. I think, secondly, I think this Oregon defensive line is going to make Ethan Garber's life extremely tough in this football game. I don't think LSU's defensive front is elite, and UCLA kind of got whipped by them up front. I think this Oregon defensive line has been really good to start the year. I see that as a massive advantage for this Oregon program. And if UCLA can't run the football, they're consistently sitting in those third and long situations. I think Tosh Lupoy and this Oregon team, especially coming off a bye, where UCLA just played in Baton Rouge, I think that favors Oregon in this matchup. Oregon is turning into a buzzsaw. At least that's what we saw against Oregon State. I'm going to take Oregon in the points. Again, for UCLA, I think you knew 2024 was going to be a growing year. Like the roster that Deshaun Foster inherited, it needs some work. And you're seeing him get it going on the high school recruiting trail, but that's not going to pay dividends in the 2024 year. I think this Oregon roster is one of the best in the country. So give me Dan Lanning, the Oregon Ducks, coming off a bye, going on the road to UCLA, covering 24.5 points. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.